What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. In a world where the weight of a family name can overshadow personal convictions, the story of two young women caught in the crossfire of politics and money becomes all the more intriguing. Today we examine how the daughters of one of Russia's notorious oligarchs, member of Putin's inner circle, remain trapped on Canada's sanctions list despite their empathetic declarations against the war in Ukraine. Their battle is not simply one of legal wrangling, but a confrontation between an inherited legacy of wealth and influence and the modern demands of accountability and personal integrity. Even as they insist on their financial independence, publicly decry the aggression that has rocked Europe, and openly confront Putin, the machinery of international sanctions continues to hold them captive. So today, let's unravel the layers of this controversy, exploring the shadow cast by a powerful patriarch, the labyrinth corridors of a foreign legal system, the denunciation of the regime of Putin by some of his allegedly closest inner circle members, that unfortunately for them came too late, and the far-reaching implications of a sanctions regime designed to choke off the evasion tactics of the elite. Let's dive into this tangled web where family ties, legal strategy, and geopolitical pressures converge in a battle that is as personal as it is political. At the center of this saga stands Mikhail Fridman, a name that resonates with the opulence and ruthless ambition of Russia's financial elite. Once ranked among the richest men in the nation, whose net worth was estimated to be at almost $15 billion, and widely regarded as an inner circle confidant of the Kremlin, Fridman's fortune was built on a foundation of strategic alliances and a very good understanding of power nuances. Yet it is precisely this legacy that has entrapped his daughters, Laura and Katya, in a web of international sanctions. Although they claim to have long since detached themselves from the corridors of oligarchic influence, the reality is that the very blood they share with their father has rendered them collateral in a broader geopolitical struggle. Despite having not set foot in Russia for decades and having pursued lives that diverge from the ruthless practices of their paternal heritage, the sisters find themselves lumped together with the regime they publicly oppose. Their names were added to Canada's sanction list not on account of any personal wrongdoing, but solely by virtue of their familial connection, a measure designed to prevent any attempt by sanctioned individuals to avoid restrictions through the transfer of assets to close relatives. For many, this approach seems a natural extension of the idea that fruits of oligarchs cannot be easily separated from the tree itself. Yet, for Laura and Katya, it is a suffocating reminder that escaping the gravitational pull of a notorious legacy is not as simple as declaring independence. The imprints of power, money, and influence are stubborn and far-reaching, leaving them with little recourse but to engage in a legal battle in an unfamiliar system that views them as extensions of a network designed to break international norms. When the daughters took their flight to the Canadian courts, they stepped into a world where legal formalities and procedural details often drown out of personal narratives. In federal court, Laura and Katya mounted an appeal to have their names removed from the sanctions list, arguing that they had long been financially independent and held no allegiances to the policies of the Kremlin. Their affidavits, sworn in locations as distant as France and Israel, painted a picture of individuals detached from any direct involvement in their father's business empire. A portrait of modern, self-reliant women striving to forge their own destinies. They even went as far as to claim a moral high ground by condemning Russia's war against Ukraine, positioning themselves as voices of dissent against an oppressive regime. And we are sure they are perfectly aware of what happens to those oligarchs who decide to cross Putin's path when he is in a bad mood. Yet, the sisters still did it, meaning, most likely, they truly believe in their innocence, since they quite literally are ready to bet their lives on it. But in this arena of legal precision, the timing and substance of their declarations came under close scrutiny. The presiding judge, Henry Brown, noted with a hint of skepticism that the fervor of their opposition appeared to emerge only after their names had become entangled in the sanctions web. In a ruling that left little room for sympathy, the court observed that there was little evidence to suggest any meaningful estranglement from their father's orbit. The silence of Mikhail Fridman during the proceedings further complicated their case, leaving the judges with an incomplete picture of the family relationship. Without direct evidence of a genuine, long-standing disconnect from the patriarch's influence, the court was forced to adhere strictly to the rationale behind the sanctions, a rationale that had been designed to preclude any circumvention through familial ties. The daughter's arguments, though impassioned and meticulously detailed, ultimately failed to sway the cold calculus of a legal system that viewed them not as independent agents, but as parts of an inseparable network linked to a powerful oligarch. In the midst of legal battles and bureaucratic maneuvering, a distinct thread of moral outrage runs through the sisters' narrative. Both Laura and Katya have used the courtroom as a platform to voice their unacceptance of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, framing their appeal not merely as a bid for economic freedom, but as a stand against the immoral war. Their declarations, formulated in the measured tones of affidavits and public statements, spell out a rejection of a legacy that condones aggression and the invasion of an independent nation. Katya's heartfelt assertion of support for Ukraine's right to self-determination, and Laura's detailed account of her minimal ties to a country she now views with disillusionment, captures the essence of a new generation trying to distance themselves from the sins of their forebears. And once again, just speaking out against Putin and his invasion is practically unacceptable if you or any of your family members or friends are in part of Putin's inner circle. Yet, Fridman's daughters do not just stop with making one rash statement. They go into details and they expand on their complete disagreement, to say the least, with their father's boss' international policies. They put their lives at stake, and what is more important, they put the life of their father in greater danger. Because somebody will have to answer for these words they said. Putin simply never forgives people who betrayed him once, or his trust. It might take months, years, but the response will most likely come in the form of another oligarch suddenly passing away even though he was in a perfect health. However, this moral outcry, as sincere as it may be, has not been enough to break the legal and bureaucratic chains binding them. The court's dismissal of their confidentiality requests for redacting their anti-war statements underscored the grim reality. Once these declarations become part of the public record, they are subject to the same scrutiny as any other piece of evidence. The timing of their opposition, which some interpreted as opportunistic rather than principled, further undermine their case. In a landscape where actions and allegiances are weighed with ruthless precision, their cries against war were viewed with as much skepticism as their claims of financial independence. It became painfully clear that in the world of international sanctions, dissent is a double-edged sword, one that cuts both ways, offering a platform for protest while simultaneously reinforcing the very mechanisms that keep them trapped. Beyond the personal tragedy of being tethered to a notorious name lies a broader narrative about the power and limitations of sanctions as a tool of modern diplomacy. Canada's decision to include those relatives in its sanctions regime was a strategic move intended to close loopholes that had allowed sanctioned oligarchs to shield their wealth by transferring assets to family members. In theory, this approach is meant to serve as a shield against evasion, a clear signal that the international community will not allow the guilty to hide behind the innocence of kinship. Yet in practice, it creates an inescapable net that captures individuals who, despite their moral objections and economic independence, remain linked to a web of power and influence. For the Fridman daughters, this means that even their most impassioned declarations against the war and their relentless pursuit of personal autonomy have been rendered useless by a sanctions regime that prioritizes familial association over individual merit. This complex dynamic raises difficult questions about the ethics of collective punishment and the challenges of disentangling personal identity from an inherited reputation. It also casts a long shadow over the future of sanctions as an instrument of foreign policy. If individuals with genuine grievances and the desire to break free from an oppressive legacy find themselves unable to distance themselves from such measures, then the very premise of targeted sanctions comes into question. The case of Laura and Katya Fridman serves as a potent reminder that sanctions, while aimed at curbing the excesses of power, can accidentally ensnare those who are striving to change the narrative. Their struggle is emblematic of a broader conflict, a battle between the desire for reform and the entrenched structures of influence that define the modern geopolitical landscape. The inescapable net of sanctions, designed to strike at the heart of corrupt regimes, ends up tightening around those who have the courage to publicly dissent, leaving them to navigate a future where freedom is constantly negotiated on the terms of inherited legacy. After all that said, we are curious to hear what you guys think. Is it justified to punish other family members of sanctioned individuals, even those who long distance themselves, just so the punishment for the future wrongdoers feels inevitable and all-absorbing? Or should the legal system spend more time and look into each case individually to distinguish those truly responsible and people who just happen to be their family members? Because as we all know, you do not choose your family. So should you then equally share the responsibility for something you had absolutely no control over? Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. You, for example, can become a channel member and unlock some special icons and additional benefits. Thanks so much for watching. See you on Wednesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all.